Tonight, we extinguish the romantic glow often cast upon the Middle Ages and instead illuminate the grime, the grit, and the downright bizarre realities of the vast majority of its population, the European peasant. Did you know that the average medieval peasant in 13th century England was estimated to work around 1,620 hours a year just to survive? A figure that sounds like relentless toil. Today, we take a deep, unsettling dive into the harrowing and often shocking daily existence of medieval peasants across Europe, from the fields of England and France to the vast plains of Poland and Russia. We'll unearth their struggles, their peculiar customs, and the relentless efforts they made, not just for survival, but to find meaning in a world that often seemed designed to crush them. Our journey begins by peeling back the layers of what work truly meant for the medieval peasant. That figure, over 1,500 hours, while substantial, doesn't paint the full peculiar picture. Imagine a year where roughly 1/3 of it was given over to holidays. Yes, you heard that right. Medieval England likely saw holiday leisure, including long vacations at Christmas, often 13 days Easter and midsummer, plus numerous saints' days, consuming a huge chunk of the calendar. Reports from France and Spain suggest even more official non-work days. Bohemian peasants, at the height of feudalism, might enjoy 90 to 100 free days annually for religious observance, markets, or festivals. Shrinking to perhaps 8 in winter was also surprisingly intermittent. It wasn't the continuous, clock-driven grind we imagine. There were established breaks for breakfast, lunch, the customary afternoon nap, and dinner. Even during the frantic harvest, mid-morning and mid-afternoon refreshment breaks were traditional rites. The very definition of a day's work for the Lord could be fluid often. A full day's labour was recorded as 2 days' works, implying half a day of service was common. This was a world ruled by the tyranny of the task, not the tyranny of the clock. Intense, back-breaking effort during planting and harvest, sometimes 12 to 16 hours a day, over 112 hours a week, was balanced by slack periods where work might dwindle to 3 to 6 hours, or even less. And beneath this formal labour lay a vast ocean of invisible labour, predominantly by women and children, spinning, weaving, brewing, mending, childcare, endless tasks blurring any line between work and free time. Now, let's step into their homes, if home is even the right word. Picture a small rudimentary hut, a cruck house. Its frame, simple wood. Its walls? Wattle and daub, a charming name for woven twigs plastered with mud, straw, and, yes, animal manure, used for its binding strength. Thatched roofs, perhaps. Minimal insulation meant bitter cold in winter, oppressive heat in summer. Inside, perpetual twilight. Windows, if they existed, were often just holes, as glass was an unimaginable luxury. A central hearth, maybe just a fire pit on the earthen floor, filled the single room with an eye-wateringly smoky haze. Furniture. A few rough stools, a wooden trunk. And the roommates? This is where it gets truly bizarre by our standards. A significant portion of the hut, sometimes a third, was penned off for the family's livestock. Pigs, cows, chickens, all living indoors with the family. This wasn't for companionship, it was for security, protecting precious animals from theft or from wolves and bears that still roamed many parts of Europe. Pragmatic, yes, but imagine the filth, the stench, the constant proximity to animal waste. Bedding was often straw, filled pallets, teeming with fleas, lice, and other biting insects. The sensory assault must have been overwhelming. And what of hygiene in such an environment? The popular image is one of utter filth, and there's a kernel of shocking truth to it. Some accounts claim peasants might have bathed fully only twice in their lives, once at birth and again after death. Let that sink in. Twice. Human and household waste, commonly tossed into the streets or the nearest river, the very same rivers often used for drinking water. Yet, amidst this, a paradox. Hand washing, particularly before meals, seems to have been a relatively common custom. Given that food was eaten with hands, often from communal bowls, this was a nod to civility. Top and tail washing, a daily cleanse of face, underarms and nether regions with a wet rag at a horse trough or a quick dip in a stream was also expected. Even the poorest usually owned a change of linen undergarments, preferred for their absorbency and ease of washing. Dental care was rudimentary but present. Peasants might use frayed hazel twigs as toothbrushes or wipe teeth with linen. No toothpaste, of course, but mixtures of salt and ground herbs like cloves were used. And parasite control? A constant battle. Combs were universal. A truly bizarre belief of the time was that lice and fleas spontaneously generated from dirt. So, efforts focused on repelling them with lavender or cedarwood or smoking clothes. Wealthier folk even hung garments in garderobes, latrines, as the ammonia fumes were thought to deter fleas. Imagine your toilet doubling as your mothball. In towns, public bathhouses were social hubs, places to bathe, yes, but also to gossip, play games, eat and drink. A strange fusion of spa and tavern. The peasant diet was a monotonous affair, a testament to their daily struggle for sustenance. Dark bread from rye or barley, and pottage, a thick, ever-simmering soup of grains and whatever vegetables were on hand, like cabbage and leeks, formed the cornerstone. Meat was a rare treat, perhaps from their own animals slaughtered for winter, or small game if hunting rights allowed. Ale or wine were the common drinks, even for children, as water was often dangerously contaminated. In Poland, the diet was similar, with foraged mushrooms and berries, and pickled sauerkraut. Russian peasants relied on hardy beets, cabbage, and rye. But looming over this sparse existence was the constant, terrifying threat of famine. Not an isolated disaster, but a recurrent nightmare. The hungry gap in late spring, when last year's stores ran out before the new harvest, was an annual dread. The Great Famine of 1315 to 1317 devastated Europe, stretching even to Poland. During such times, desperation knew no bounds. People ate wild roots, grasses, nuts, tree bark. Draft animals essential for farming were slaughtered. Precious seed grain was consumed. The social fabric frayed. Children were abandoned, a grim reality perhaps echoed in tales like Hansel and Gretel. The elderly sometimes voluntarily starved themselves so the young could survive. And the most horrifying accounts, though perhaps amplified, speak of cannibalism and infanticide. A report from Bristol during the Great Famine describes prisoners so desperate they would pluck and tear in pieces, such as were newly put into prison, and devoured them half alive. Others mention people opening fresh graves to eat the dead. These are the unthinkable choices faced in the shadow of starvation. Beyond the struggle with nature, peasants were bound by the iron chains of feudalism. Serfdom meant being legally tied to the lord's manor, owing labour, often 2 or 3 days a week on his lands, and a hefty share of their own produce. Tithes to the church, another tenth, and often more to the lord. Fees for using the lord's mill, his oven, his wine press. Fees to marry, especially outside the manor. Some dues were bizarrely specific. An extra dozen eggs at Easter, a goose at Christmas. And then there was the purported ius primae noctis, the rite of the first night, allowing the lord to sleep with a serf's bride. While its actual enforcement is debated, often commuted by a fee, its mere conceptual existence is a chilling testament to the lord's power. In Eastern Europe, this yoke tightened into what historians call second serfdom, while Western Europe saw serfdom wane in places like Poland. Labour obligations could escalate to 6 days a week per household by the 18th century. Polish peasants were legally bound to the land by 1540. In Russia, it became de facto slavery. Serfs, called souls, could be bought, sold, traded, with or without land, their lives entirely at the lord's whim. Justice, too, wore a bizarre and terrifying face. When guilt was uncertain, trial by ordeal was common. Accused of a crime? You might have to carry a red, hot iron bar or retrieve a stone from boiling water. If your wounds healed cleanly within 3 days, God had proclaimed your innocence. Or perhaps the ordeal by cold water, thrown bound into consecrated water. Floating meant guilt, the holy water rejecting you. Sinking meant innocence, though often at the cost of drowning. Punishments were designed to strike terror. Stocks and pillory for public shaming. For more serious crimes, flogging, branding, or mutilations like lopping off hands or ears, permanent marks of criminality, burning at the stake, or the agonizing death of being broken on the wheel. One truly grotesque instrument was the thorned ruff or spiked collar. A heavy iron collar weighing around 5 kilograms, lined with sharp spikes that bored into the victim's neck, worn for days, preventing rest, leading to infection, gangrene, and eventual confession or coma. Even in death, social control continued with non-normative burials for outcasts, buried face down, decapitated, weighed with stones, in unconsecrated ground, perhaps to prevent their spirits from returning. And perhaps the most profoundly bizarre legal spectacle, animal trials. Yes, animals, pigs, roosters, rats, even dolphins, formally indicted, tried in court, and sentenced. Pigs were frequent defendants, accused of property damage or even killing children. One convicted pig in 1386 was reportedly dressed in a waistcoat, gloves, drawers, and a human mask for its execution. A rooster was tried in 1474 for the unnatural crime of laying an egg. This reflects a worldview where the lines between human and animal moral culpability were shockingly fluid. In a world fraught with inexplicable hardship, the supernatural was an ever-present reality. Folk medicine was a curious blend of empirical knowledge and potent magic. The local wise woman, or Dinian Hisbys in Wales, was the primary caregiver, wielding knowledge of herbal remedies passed down through generations. Willow bark, a source of aspirin, verpain fennel for flatulence, hyssop for coughs. Hungarian peasants used yarrow, onion, garlic, chamomile. But illness was often blamed not on physical causes, but on destiny, sin, bewitchment, or an imbalance of the body's four humours, themselves influenced by planets. So, treatments involve spells, charms, and incantations to cure ailments, incite lust, or control the weather. Peasants might bind the leg of a doll to heal a person's broken leg. Holy wells were sites of pilgrimage for their curative powers. Even Christian prayers in Latin, a language few understood, could become like magical incantations. Hungarian folklore offers vivid examples of this fusion. Gold was believed to purify itself by burning with a blue flame on St. George's Day. Throwing a rag on it could prevent the treasure from vanishing. Horseshoes were potent luck charms, their power varying if points faced up to hold luck or down to poor luck. Iron, like an axe or sickle, might be thrown at hailstorms or lightning to disperse them. Whirlwinds were feared as vehicles for witches or the tautos, a shamanic figure, and peasants might throw sickles or look through sieves to combat them. And for wounds, wine was sometimes used for cleaning, followed by cauterization with a hot iron. Crude, but an early attempt at antisepsis. The great milestones of life, love, marriage, birth, death, were steeped in customs that can seem utterly bizarre or deeply shocking to us. For peasants, marriage was less about romance and more a pragmatic union for economic survival and heirs. Canon law permitted marriage at 12 for girls and 14 for boys. In early medieval times, marriage could be shockingly informal. Mutual consent uttered in the street, the pub, even in bed, leading to the church later formalizing it. And then there was the semi-public consummation or bedding. Especially for the upper classes, but influencing broader customs, the newlyweds' first union might be witnessed by family or guests, a communal affirmation of the marriage. Imagine that for wedding night nerves. In parts of Sweden and northern France, premarital sex was sometimes tolerated, even encouraged, not for liberation, but as a grimly practical way to ensure fertility before committing to marriage. If pregnancy resulted, marriage quickly followed. Concerns over virginity led to bizarre tests, like a 14th century one where a bride drank water steeped with black amber. If she couldn't hold her water, her impurity was supposedly proven. Folk remedies, some involving leeches, were even available to help a non-virgin appear pure. The best man at a wedding, often literally, the groom's best swordsman, hired to prevent violent interruptions. And early Slavic accounts speak of games on village outskirts where men captured their wives during dances, a peculiar courtship indeed. Childbirth was a shadowland of peril. Maternal mortality was horrific, Perhaps 5% of women died from the birth itself, another 15% from childbed fever, postpartum infections. Infant mortality was equally devastating, with some estimates suggesting up to half of all children died before their first birthday. Births were attended by midwives in a female-only domain. In Poland, the village barber, or wise woman, would undress the labouring mother and, to promote a smooth delivery, open all locks in the house, doors, chests, everything. Garlic and onion were used to ward off evil spirits blamed for labour pains. The mother might even be placed on the ground to draw strength from the earth. Umbilical cord superstitions abounded. Polish peasants saved and dried the cord for good luck, sometimes giving it to the child at school to promote learning. In Russia, a newborn girl's cord might be cut with a spindle, symbolically linking her to spinning. Polish pregnancy superstitions were incredibly specific. Looking at a crippled person could cause a crippled baby looking at fire, a red birthmark at mice, a mole into a keyhole, a cross-eyed baby. Walking under a clothesline risked umbilical cord problems. Childhood, as we know it, was a foreign concept. Children were miniature adults, integrated into the family's work from around age 5 to 7. In Russia, this was formalized. At 7, boys got their first proper pants, girls their first gowns, marking their entry into full-time jobs. The Russian word for child, rebionok, even shares a root with work and slave. Many children were sent away as servants from as young as 7, but more commonly 10 or 12. In times of extreme hardship, infanticide or abandonment was a grim reality. And, most disturbingly, there are accounts of children, typically girls aged 12 to 14 or younger, being prostituted by their families for survival. Yet, life wasn't all grim toil. Festivals provided crucial release. Carnival, before Lent, was a time of parades and wild indulgence. But even celebrations had their freaky side. In Hungary, St. Nicholas Day processions featured not just the kindly saint, but also the terrifying Krampus, a horned, demonic figure who scared and sometimes lightly whipped naughty children and girls. Imagine Santa arriving with his own personal demon. St. Lucy's Day in Hungary was a time of heightened fear of witches, met with garlic in windows. And those early Slavic games where wives were captured during dances. A bizarre festival indeed. Music and dance were vital. Shepherds played flutes, villagers carolled, linking arms, circling and singing tunes that were often bawdy and irreverent. In the Balkans, communal dances like the kolo were central. Travelling minstrels brought stories, juggling and acrobatics. But leisure also had a dark, violent streak. Bull baiting, bear baiting and cockfighting were common, accepted entertainment. Medieval football was described as basically a melee without weapons. And there was a ball. A chaotic, brutal free-for-all. While these threads of hardship and peculiarity ran through much of Europe, the vast lands to the east wove their own distinct patterns. In Poland, as we've seen, serfdom tightened its grip, and unique birth customs, like those overseen by the barber, held sway. The medieval Polish hymn Bogorodzica was even sung by knights before battle, a potent mix of faith and folk spirit. In Bohemia, modern Czech lands, peasants enjoyed a surprising number of free days, perhaps 90 to 100 annually, before the Hussite Revolution in the 15th century outlawed many saints' days, abruptly increasing their workload. Winter in Bohemia, like elsewhere, was for mending tools, but also for communal activities like corn-shucking bees, where women gathered to husk corn, gossip, and sing, turning chore into social event. Kievan Rus and later Russia saw serfdom evolve into its most extreme form, akin to slavery. Peasants lived in timber izbas, often sleeping atop large earthen ovens for warmth. We've touched on the chillingly pragmatic view of children as rebionok, workers from age 7. The Balkans and Hungary present another fascinating canvas. The Balkan Zadruga was a unique joint family or communal household where multiple generations lived and worked collectively, a system that formed the basis of early Serb social organization. Centuries of Ottoman rule in the Balkans meant folklore, songs, dances, epic tales became the primary vessel for cultural survival. Hungarian peasant life was also deeply intertwined with a rich tapestry of superstitions. The tautos, a shaman-like figure chosen by fate, perhaps born with teeth or an extra finger, mediated between worlds, healed and interpreted dreams, a belief coexisting with Christianity. Their pantheon included dragons, elves, giants, and malevolent witches. And who could forget Krampus joining St. Nicholas on his rounds? So, what are we to make of this litany of the bizarre, the brutal, the almost unbelievable? It would be easy to paint the medieval peasant as a figure of pure, unadulterated misery. And indeed, their lives were fraught with hardship unimaginable to us. The constant toil, the shocking living conditions, the ever-present threat of famine and disease, the crushing weight of feudal obligations, the terrifying and arbitrary nature of justice, the pervasive superstitions born of fear and uncertainty. It's a grim picture. Yet, to stop there would be to miss the most extraordinary part of their story, their resilience. Despite it all, they endured. They forged strong community bonds, evident in cooperative labour, shared resources from common lands, and the vital social cohesion of their festivals, however strange. They resisted, not always in grand revolts, though those happened too, from England to Bulgaria to Transylvania, but in countless acts of everyday resistance, foot, dragging, feigning illness, petty theft from the Lord, when possible, flight. Their rich cultural traditions, the folklore, songs, dances, the deep knowledge of herbs and the land, these were not mere pastimes, but vital tools for survival, for identity. Perhaps those very beliefs and rituals that seem so bizarre to us, the magic, the superstitions, the strange festivals, were sources of profound psychological strength, offering comfort, meaning, and community in a world that often offered little else. The medieval peasant, living a life so often harrowing and bizarre, stands as a stark, enduring testament to the human spirit's capacity to find light even in the deepest darkness, to build community amidst chaos, and to survive against almost impossible odds. Thank you for joining us at the Candlelight Historian. If this glimpse into the strange and often brutal world of the medieval peasant has intrigued you, be sure to like this video, Subscribe for more journeys into the shadowed corners of the past. Comments below. What bizarre fact shocked you the most? Until next time, keep the candles of curiosity burning.